Good day and welcome to a new straight up hangout. Today's topic is upgrading Craft CMS2 to Craft CMS3 with plugins. We've got Brandon Kelly and Andrew Welch with us today, and we're looking forward to what we learn. This is a straight up hangout. Our goal here on straight up hangouts is to learn Craft CMS. Quite simple and plenty to learn. So why don't we get started? The question we'll start with here is, what do we do? What resources are available to help us start upgrading from Craft 2 to Craft 3? All right, I'll start with the easy answers, and we'll save the harder ones for Brandon later. All right, so as usual, we start right with the docs. We've got a page in the Craft 3 docs for upgrading from Craft 2. So if you're just getting started, give it a shot. Start right here. A few other doc pages you'll want to check out is updating the changes in Craft 3 doc page, as well as the updating plugins for Craft 3 doc page if you're a plugin developer. And by all means, read all of the docs. It helps you learn a lot. So
I actually have a question for Brandon on this that he probably would be the only one to know the answer. The docs that are on GitHub, are those now potentially out of date, or are they being synced with what's on the website, or is this the new canonical place to go for Craft 3 docs?
They should be one and the same. We've got a buddy pipeline in place where whenever we push to the main doc repo, it updates the website automatically.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to know because I have the old GitHub pages bookmarked, and I want to make sure that I wasn't accidentally hitting stuff that's out of date.
Nope.
Excellent. I've got a site rendering well for me. All right, so what we have here today is I've got the Happy Logger demo site for Craft 2 installed, and we are going to be upgrading it to Craft 3. We're going to consider both upgrade paths. If you get into the docs, we can upgrade keeping the same folder structure, or we can upgrade adopting the new Craft folder structure. A couple things I've updated with the Happy Logger site, just so that we have some examples to talk through. I've got 3 plugins in mind that we can talk through as we go through this. One is, by default, we have some entries that use the Redactor plugin. So our RichText fields are using the Redactor plugin. In Craft 3, Craft removes the Redactor plugin from Craft Core. So we'll look at what we do with that situation. I've got Sprout fields installed with a couple custom fields. And Sprout Fields is a plugin that we wrote that has a handful of migration scenarios that I thought could be worth discussion here. The fields need to get updated. Some of them change slightly. So we can take a look at what happens as migration needs to change some things as it goes through the process. And I've got Sprout SEO installed because we actually haven't had a chance to release it yet for Craft 3. So I figured that's a good situation. We may or may not have access to some plugins as we move to Craft 3, and we may want to discuss alternatives or what options we have there. So we'll get into each of those examples as we go along. All right, so let's start off. Brandon, what do we need to do before we start upgrading from Craft 2 to Craft 3?
So basic checklist is make sure that your plugins are ready for it. So you can actually do that from the Craft 2 control panel. If you check for updates, there's a little widget there now that actually shows your upgrade compatibility for the plugins you've got installed.
Whoever thought of that, that was a stroke of genius, by the way. No, I'm serious.
We wanted to start putting some heat on plugin developers. And
it also gives people that kind of comfort, like they can look at it and be like, oh, I could actually do this.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm missing the what's the URL directly to that? I don't
just
have.
Click on check for updates down at the bottom.
There we go. So we're
And then if you
scrolling
scroll
all the way down here to the bottom and seeing.
Yeah, and
I
sure
see.
enough, you've got Sprout Fields ready, and Sprout SEO is not yet. And then for anyone that's watching this, it's worth noting that while by default this thing is kind of returning data based on what's in the plugin store, if your plugin handle has changed or you've written a plugin that kind of provides an alternative upgrade path for someone using a different Craft2 plugin, or you just want to like write a message to whoever's using your plugin and kind of let them know that something's coming or whatever. The responses for this are in part formulated by a PHP config file in the CraftNet repo. So you can go to github.com/pixelantonic/craftnet and then do a pull request on the config/craft2-plugins.php file. And if you do that, that's like kind of the centralized place where you can broadcast information about your in development Craft3 plugins. So go up a level, go up to the config folder, config, and then Craft2-plugins. So this is kind of the override file for everything that doesn't have an exact match in the plugin store already. This is where that information gets stored. So we do accept pull requests on this. Obviously we'll review it first, but if you have something you want to communicate about your Craft2 plugin, this is the way to do it.
Very nice. I was wondering where that came from. Nice to know we could submit our own suggestions there.
Yeah. So assuming that you've got an upgrade path for your plugins, and you've kind of read the documentation and made sure that you know what each of those plugins is updating them is going to involve. The next step would be just back up your database and go through the docs, pick a path on this upgrade doc.
Great. One question while we're here on this, preparing for the upgrade. Now you say your site is running at least Craft 2.6. What is the reason 2.6.2788 is the main one to update to?
Because that's a breakpoint release, and anytime we do a breakpoint release, it's basically an opportunity for us to clean out some files that are no longer needed, some migration files and things like that. So basically, any releases after 2.6.2788 have started making assumptions about your database that won't be the case unless you're on at least that version.
Okay.
So,
do any migrations happen after the 2.6.2788 release?
Yeah, there are some shared migrations between 2.6 and 3.0, but any migrations that exist in both places, we've just had to make sure that they do the same thing in both environments. So
okay. So in the case of a plugin that has some migrations, what is it in the plugin's developer best interest to recommend that they update to the latest release where the final migrations get run, or make sure that they're also including any migrations that are beyond?
It's kind of up to you as a plugin developer. We do have a property that plugins can set called minVersionRequired, I believe, and that's where you can determine like your most recent breakpoint. Basically, like if you want to delete a bunch of old migrations that existed in your version 1.0, then just figure out what the earliest version is where all those migrations that you're deleting would have already been run, and then you can set minVersionRequired to that version, and then Craft will actually check that when it's attempting to upgrade a plugin, and always make sure that you're coming from at least that version before you can go to the current one. And if you don't, then it'll give you an error saying you need to install an older version of this plugin first.
Is minVersionRequired a Craft 2 thing as well as Craft 3?
No, that's for plugins, it's a new thing for plugins in Craft 3.
So in Craft 3, we can actually have a plugin that says minVersionRequired is a Craft 2 version of the plugin?
Sure. I mean, it's all just
the version number.
The version number, it doesn't really matter. basically, like, the way that Craft stores what plugins are installed and what versions that they're installed at is pretty much the same between Craft 2 and 3. So that data does get ported over when you upgrade. So like we used it for commerce, for example. I don't remember the exact min version required we set, but we basically had a bunch of migrations we wanted to delete for commerce 2. And so we just kind of figured, okay, well, so let's say that the last migration was added in, commerce 1.2. We went and set for commerce 2, we set min version to version 1.2. So, the idea there is like it's still going to be kind of a pain in the butt if you upgrade and you find out that you weren't on that minimum version required, because then you kind of have to do the whole Craft 3 upgrade again. But that's still better than losing data in the process. So, kind of gives you a warning as early as commerce possibly could, saying it looks like you weren't up to date as far as you should have been before running this upgrade.
And plugin developers can't customize the message that gets thrown at that point. It's just Craft saying it's not the right version number.
Exactly.
You need to get it.
Right.
Okay, great. So make sure you're on the right version of Craft, and make sure you check all your plugin documentation to see if they're requiring any necessary version before we start.
And it's really up to the plugin. Like there's nothing that says you can't, when moving to Craft 3, go ahead and port all of your old migrations at the same time. It's just more code that you'd have to port, but there's no reason you couldn't do that. And then support people coming from like version 1.0 of your Craft 2 plugin. That said, I don't expect most people will do that. I expect most plugin developers would just assume that the person upgrading was already up to date in Craft 2. So I guess we should probably say that's like another step on the to-do list is, make sure Craft is running at least that version, and also probably go through your plugins and make sure they're all up to date before going through the upgrade.
Great. Yeah, I as a plugin developer, I didn't realize the min version required had been added. So that's good to know.
Yeah.
All right. So then let's consider these two different paths. I'm going to walk through them and just so we can kind of explore them along the way. The first path is we update and we keep the current directory structure as it is. So in this one, we are going to go to our Craft project. So here's our Craft project, and I'm gonna just open a terminal. And once we're at our Craft project, we can now require Craft CMS version 3. And I guess I don't know where I got this. It says release candidate 1 in this, but I don't think we need that any longer.
No, that's a good point. I'll change that.
So we will require Craft, and that's going to pull Craft down into our directory structure. And to see where that's happening in your Craft structure, that's happening in the vendor folder. If you're new to Composer, we just had a hangout last week going into detail on how Craft handles Composer. So by all means, check that out. It's got a lot of good information.
I think it's probably worth noting, Ben, that semver actually would have been okay with the RC on there. Just the nature of the way Composer handles semvers, it basically asking for anything newer than that. So, and Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, but that should work just as well. I mean, it makes sense that it should be updated, but that would work in terms of getting the latest Craft, right?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. It's just overly verbose right now.
Yeah.
All right. Great. And so then if we're keeping the same directory structure, we then are prompted in the docs to do something we're told never to do. We open our index file and find the line, do not edit below this line. And then we swap all that out for this new code. Now, why are we doing this?
Because the instructions said to.
I guess the better question is, what does this new code that we don't need to worry about do for us?
I'll try it, and then Brandon can tell me everything that's wrong. But basically, this is the file that bootstraps Craft. So it it sets a couple of constants that it needs, and then it loads the Bootstrap to get Craft kind of up and running. And since some of that has changed from Craft 2 to Craft 3, that's why we got to update it.
Okay. Yep. And does this specific Bootstrap file have like the Craft 2 settings, or what I guess is it the base path is this? We're defining the base path as the old Craft path. Is that it?
Yeah. So I mean, the code that you've pasted in here is basically a slightly modified version of the default index.php script you'd get if you were starting a new Craft 3 site from scratch. It's just been modified slightly to work with that Craft path variable and kind of adapt the old to the new.
And supports .env, right? That's part of it.
And I don't think in this case it would.
Oh, it doesn't do that?
Well,
Yeah,
not if you're going this path, just because you know, very few Craft 2 sites were using .env.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So like, it's basically like this path that you're going down. This is kind of the way to keep your existing structure and files as intact as possible. You know, while bootstrapping Craft 3 instead of Craft 2, and kind of satisfying the minimum requirements to do that. So it's not ideal. There's a couple caveats, and one of them is that you don't get .env. Another is that you're not going to get the Craft executable, so you don't get any access to you know, the various console commands that Craft offers. And then thirdly, you also are generally just using a file structure that the new documentation is not written for. So, you know, in general, we'd probably say you should probably go with the new structure and kind of follow that set of documentation instead. But we realize that there's projects out there that are overly, you know, complex in terms of what they've done to bootstrap Craft in some custom way, or you know, made a bunch of modifications to their index.php file or whatever. And so basically this path exists for them where they really just want to get running with Craft 3 and don't want to make a whole thing of, you know, restructuring their site over it. So.
All right, great. Well, all those steps were fairly easy. The next step in our list is just go to the control admin URL and see if we get the prompt for an update. So let's see if we did it right. Nope. What'd I do wrong?
So Ben, we have a question here from someone who's tuning in.
Yes.
I'm not going to try and pronounce his name because I'm sure I'll butcher it.
Erwin
Heiser. He said, any recommendations for Craft 2 installs with the Craft folder inside of the public folder?
So in a Craft 2 install, we might have a situation where the Craft folder is...
Yeah, maybe they've got some kind of shared hosting and it doesn't let them,
yeah.
You know, I don't know.
I mean, same basic logic either way. Like if you're doing that, like regardless of what your Craft path was set to, if you're going with that first option on using the existing file structure, then the new code should continue to work with that as well. You know, that code that we've given you there in the docs is so that you can take your existing Craft path variable and it'll continue pointing to the right place and everything should just work.
Perfect.
Yeah. So Ben, did you save your file?
I might not have. Yeah, there we go. Small details. Okay, now my Craft. Did I?
And then
try to make this as realistic as possible with the highest number of mistakes.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that's super useful because people may run into the exact same thing, you know?
All right, so our Craft path is not working properly. So that's set here. And pointing one level up to Craft.
So so there's one aspect of the instructions that you didn't go over.
All right.
I believe, or maybe we just didn't document it correctly, but go up just a little bit more. So you'll notice the first step here is open your terminal and go to the Craft directory.
Ah, okay.
So if you're going to go this route, then when you run that composer_require command, you should be in the craft directory rather than the root.
So the would vendor get installed in the craft directory then?
Vendor, yeah. So I mean, you can basically, yeah, just move it in there and move your composer.json and composer.lock files into there as well. And I believe at that point it's the same difference as if you had done it according to the docs.
All right, and this is a craft 2 issue probably. I have the config my local.
So this is, yeah. So this is I should add a note to the docs about this. Init sequels is a database config setting that has gone away in craft 3. It was there basically to add MySQL 5.7 support to craft 2. And it's no longer necessary in craft 3. So I'll go ahead and I'll make a note that I should make a note in the docs about that.
All right, so we finally made it to our update screen. Conveniently, had a few errors to explore there. And if we hit update here, it's going to trigger the database update. So I'm not going to hit that yet. I'm going to say that's the first path on keeping the folder structure the same. Now, let's explore the second path as we and then we'll hit update after that. And if any of you out there do have questions, we're taking questions in the back channel. That's where Erwin got his question in. So if you go to Craft Slack in the back channel and feel free to post your questions there, we'll keep an eye on that. All right, so now let's say we didn't want to keep our same folder structure. We wanted to start over and just do that from scratch. I'm going to undo this particular change, and I'll undo the vendor and the composer files. I think those are the only changes that we
yes,
added here. All right, so this one, well, actually, I guess I didn't need to do that. We're following the same instructions as step 1. So again, we go to our command, our console, and this time we'll cd into the craft directory. So we are in the craft directory now, and this is where we want to run our
actually. So if you're going this route, you should not be in the craft directory.
Okay, well,
actually, wait, hang on. Maybe I'm wrong.
I do think you move all of these out of the craft folder.
Yeah. So in this step, it actually doesn't really matter where you run it. It's more like run it wherever you want your project root to be.
Okay.
So.
All right. So we're going to stick at the top level here, and we're going to run our same composer_require command. That's going to pull down craft and get us the same situation with vendor added to our test folder there. Next, we have to configure our .env file. So why don't we take a moment and talk about the .env file. So actually, I guess
you might just not be able to see it because it's a hidden file.
I'm using a program that should see .files here. So,
oh yeah. Okay.
So I ran. I just did.
What did you run? Did you run composer_require craft/CMS?
I ran the yes.
Okay, so you should have run composer_create_project.
Okay, so then it's not the same as step 2 in the docs.
No, it's step 2 of the installation instructions, not step 2 of the previous.
My bad.
Yeah.
Learn.
And actually, we just rewrote this thing, so I probably need to update that reference a little bit. But basically, the point is you're going to install craft in a normal way,
All right.
following the installation instructions.
Great. So I'm going to delete my vendor folder again and my composer files again. And now we're going to call, from our base folder here, we're going to call composer create project craft CMS and target that specific folder that we're in. and I have a. Oh,
Yeah,
I
if
don't
you're
have
creating a
empty.
new project using Composer, it has to be in an empty, either in a directory that doesn't exist or one that's completely empty. You can't
Okay.
just do a create project on something that already exists.
So how do we handle this with a previous craft installation?
So your best bet is probably going to be to pick a new project directory.
Okay. So in this case, we're just going to add a new folder here
Sure.
and cd into new, and then we'll rerun that command in our empty folder, and then we can move our files back to the top level afterwards, or maybe
Sure.
that's modified.
For what it's worth, when I've done this, what I typically do is I'll just rename the old website like .old or _old or something, and then I'll create the new one with the actual name. But either way works, you know.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so
I think at this point you're probably ready to go back to the upgrade instructions.
okay, so now we're configuring our .env file with our database connection settings.
Yeah.
Or we can run craft setup from our command line. I'm going to edit it just so we can see it a little easier here. So here's our new .env file. Craft creates this for us. When Craft installs it, it adds a few things to it for us, like the security key and the dev environment, I guess. If we went through the command prompt, it'd prompt us to update some of these as well. We could choose Postgres instead of MySQL and whatnot. And all right, so I put in my local database information.
So should we talk about what the whole point of having the .env file is?
Yeah, I think it's a good topic to discuss. So why after 10 years of multi-environment configs on Expression Engine and Craft being perfectly acceptable as multi-environment files stored in the repo, have we decided that .env is the better default approach?
Yeah, so the main thing is that it's much more secure. You really don't want to be storing passwords and things like that in your Git repo. You know, you never know. You know, if you ever want to share your repo with a new contractor or whatever else, like you probably don't want to be handing over a bunch of keys to your server at the same time. And just getting in the habit of never actually committing those things to Git is probably a good habit to be in. Even if you think that you won't need it, it's still better to be on the safe side here. You're limiting the number of places that you know that data is stored, which is inherently going to be more secure. And then also, it's just, you know, like if you're working with someone else and you both want to be working on your local versions of the craft site at, you know, example.test, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have the same environments with the same database passwords and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, either you both agree to use the same passwords on both environments, or you agree on, you know, who's getting which development URL so that those configs can be kind of tailored to, you know, each person's environment. And it just kind of like that just gets more and more crazy the more people that are on the project. So it just kind of makes sense to store settings that are only relevant to a single environment, to just store them directly on that environment in a place that doesn't get committed to Git.
Yeah, and to Brendan's point, I mean, it may very well be more than just, you know, you may say, okay, whatever, the contractor has the admin password anyway, or the database password anyway, but you may very well have other private keys, like, you know, maybe a Stripe token or other things that you don't want a web developer, contractor, or whatever to have access to.
Right. Yeah, the database password is probably the safest thing you could put in here. But yeah, like for example, on our end, you know, we were storing Stripe API keys, GitHub API keys, you know, all kinds of stuff that like doesn't require to be executed from this specific environment that, you know, like a lot of times database passwords don't really matter as much because you have to be on their network first. But something like an API token, like that's something you can use anywhere. So
and if you hired someone on to work on the Craft CMS site, you don't want them having access to your tokens and stuff,
Right, exactly. So.
I think so. So then, how do you? So I'm actually on the other side of this. I think the .env kind of messes with the workflow more than it helps it in a lot of scenarios. But I don't want to get into a big debate here. But I think
like one thing to keep in mind is they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah, and there's several things you can do at the server level to only require certain people access to your server, whether they have your password or not, or various other ways to address the scenario. And I think it's an interesting point to point out that Fort Rabbit, a Craft hosting partner, even has a post on their blog about security vulnerabilities with the .env file. So while it may be more secure in some situations, it's also has
there's no situation where it's less secure. I'll say that, and for sure, it's a file. Every file is susceptible to security vulnerabilities, but there's no situation where you're storing something in .env instead of a git or a craft config is going to be more secure or less secure. I'm sorry. It's like they're not mutually exclusive.
I don't think
if there's aspects of it that still work for you in a multi-environment config within Craft, you can still do that.
I guess I feel it's an unfair statement because you don't control the whole stack, right? There is situations where it's less secure if you don't control certain things about how the server is set up, or you don't control how certain developers are doing certain things in the workflow.
There's no situation where something in the .env file would be more susceptible to a vulnerability than a .php file living right alongside it.
Mm-hmm.
They're both just files. If someone can access the .php file, they could also access .env and vice versa.
I think the argument he's making is the fact that it sets the environmental variables, which you can then dump via PHP info or the admin.
But in order to get that far, you'd also need to.
People can't connect to your server unless they're using a certain IP address, and if you've authorized a certain few people on your team to do that.
Okay, so let me put it this way. There's what are you getting? What's the benefit of storing passwords that are only relevant on a single environment? What's the benefit you're getting out of putting those in a place where they're in Git and managed in a portable way?
I feel there's one. So in
like
our
what's the like? Let's say you have a
in our configurations in Craft 2 and other things, there was a not recognized environment fallback. So if it didn't recognize the environment in the repo, it would fall back. So it gave a way to say default to whatever is set up in a particular environment as if it's not in the environment config. So you can set up the multi-environment config in a way where all environments are behaving in the same way as .env if you wanted to. Alternatively, I think there's a lot of shops out there that aren't developers, and there's a lot of projects out there that don't have large budgets. And to have knowledge of infrastructure and development workflows and how to design and build a Craft site, I think there's a lot of levels of knowledge there that sometimes are not present on certain teams in various projects. And something like .env requires an additional understanding of getting access to the server, making updates to an environment configuration on a particular server in different environments. And I'm not going to argue that that's a unreasonable thing to learn as a web developer.
Knowing how to upload a file to a server is going to definitely be within the wheelhouse of anyone using Craft. So
well, I guess it's. However, on a team where there are different levels of access to the server, it might be that only one person can access that. And if it's a busy week and they can't get to it or something, there's an access issue where somebody could have tweaked something in a development environment and tested it. They would then have to go through a process to get access to that environment to make a change and test something. So I don't think the env direction is unreasonable. I don't want my statement to be that at all. I feel there's a similar amount of trade-offs either way you go, depending on the knowledge of your team and how you.
And I think we should move past this, but let me just make it clear, in case it's not already, that I don't agree, and I think that there aren't any reasonable trade-offs, and that would be worth going back to the way you do it in Craft 2.
I want to make it clear that I'm not getting in the middle of this one.
So
you two go at it.
As the representative from Pixel and Phonic, I'm just going to say our official recommendation is you go this route.
Well, and that's a good reason to have your default be .env as well. So.
Yeah. And if you really don't like it, there's nothing stopping you from going the old way.
All right.
This is really just one more level of abstraction. Like there's, if you look, you still have a db.php in your config folder, and all that's doing is pulling in the environment values there. And so if you really want, you could just delete the getEnd function and replace it with a static string, or replace it with a multi-environment config. It's still up to you. So.
All right. Well, hopefully the dialogue helps a few people understand .env and why it was chosen, and understand how to use it a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the takeaway is that secrets have to be stored somewhere, and it's kind of up to you to decide what the best way to do it is. And I'm going to express no opinion on this.
Well, I guess I feel it's been it's been a convention in the community for a long time, and I haven't heard of a rash of security incidents on Expression Engine or Craft 2 because of the old way. I could understand that. Yes, time goes on and things improve in what options we have, but I don't think we want to say the old way was so insecure that there was a ton of problems with it. Craft 2 sites are still out there, thousands of them, probably using this old way. Are they less secure because they're not? Are they more vulnerable because of this in a way that people should be actively trying to update from that? Or
I would say it's not at any given time. It's not that you're more vulnerable. It's that if you add other people to the project, if there's things you're more susceptible to making a mistake and accidentally sharing credentials that you didn't want to. Like I get your point that like technically you could go in and you could configure your web server to restrict access to certain IPs, and you could do all sorts of stuff like that. I think that the people that understand how to do that or will remember to do that are fewer than the people that can figure out how to edit a text file.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of and how to upload a text file to their server.
And with anything, just in general, just because something works doesn't mean there isn't necessarily some better way to do it too, right?
So, and then I'll say one other thing is that it's it's just becoming the standard way that you save credentials that are environment specific. So if for no other reason, even if there was no legitimate security reason or anything else, this is the .env thing is becoming a standard across not just PHP frameworks, but and other languages as well. It's kind of becoming an industry-wide standard of like, this is how you store, whether it's in a .env file or it's actually configured in your web server. Like if you have AWS, you can go in and there's actually a UI for managing your environment variables. But storing this sort of thing as environment variables, this is just becoming the way that you do this at an industry-wide thing. So.
And to make a note too, Pixel and Tonic does take steps to make sure that those environment variables aren't visible from the control panel as well. If you look at the the utilities tab at all of the global environment variables in the control panel, you will not see the password or at least the variables you know about to obscure.
Anything that has password or key or secret or anything like that that sounds like it might be sensitive, we obfuscate it.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, we should have saved that till the end of the walkthrough here, but there we go. There's some discussion on the .env file and the new Craft way of doing that. Let's continue. We have just updated our .env file with our database credentials. And let's remember where we were here. So we're on step 2. We updated things with the database credentials. Now we can run Craft, or we could have run Craft setup. we can copy over our general.php file. This is where my setup gets a little messy here because I didn't just do this in a separate folder. So I'm grabbing this general.php file and taking it back to my new folder. And now I don't want to overwrite all of the default settings that Craft's provided. Now I want to integrate whatever I had that was there.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you. I think, you know, the assumption is that you've already put some time into making sure your config works for you, and the chances are you can mostly go with just, you know, replacing the entire contents of the new file with your old file.
All right.
You know, some of those settings might be deprecated or not supported anymore, but for the most part, you should be able to just replace the whole contents.
All right, so we're just going to add them here in this case. I'm going to environmentVariables is one of the things that is going away in place of what are they called?
Aliases.
Aliases. So we can look at aliases after this, and I won't worry about the local setup. This is part of the original.
You can keep the environmentVariables config there. It will still get pulled in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Does it get used in Craft? It's not deprecated, or it's not.
It's deprecated. It's deprecated, but it basically, you know, they'll get converted to aliases.
Okay. Okay. When you run the setup process. Oh, why don't we keep it then and watch that happen?
Well, I mean, I mean, like basically at runtime, Craft, when it's loading your config, it'll find that you have defined environmentVariables and it'll replace it with aliases. But it won't actually update the PHP file or anything. And just throw a deprecation error.
All right. We're copying our old license key file. And where was I copying that to? I was copying it to the config folder. I apologize. I didn't. I think my folder structure is a bit confusing for this demo at this point, but we're going to make it through. All right, templates to templates. So we're moving our Craft templates folder here. We'll take everything from it and move it into our new folder of templates. And if we made any changes to our public index file, and we didn't in this case, so we'll leave that as is. Copy any public directory into your project's web folder. So here we have our everything here in our public. We'll put in our web folder.
With I guess we should say with the exception of index.php.
Okay. So I'll replace htaccess and I'll replace CP resources, and I will skip index.php. All right. And we update our web server to point to the new web folder. All right, so now to kind of clean up my mess here, I can delete all of this other stuff in this top level folder. And then take everything in this new folder of mine here and put it where my site used to be. All right, so now I guess if we wanted to keep things as is, we could just rename this to public. Is that correct?
You could.
So that'll make it easier if we don't want to mess with our server settings that allow for that. If we want to change it to web, I run MAMP, so it might be simple to show what this would look like.
I think Craft is completely agnostic to what you name that. You know,
yeah.
you could name it Poodle and it would still work.
Yeah, as long as the server is pointing at that folder. So here in MAMP, I have my document root settings pointing to the previous public. I can update that to the new web option. Already guessed, oh, it's not the right. You point to the new web folder there. And restart our servers and a new resolution on my, I gotta save this. Doesn't fit on my, when I save it, I restart the servers, and that'll kind of register on the server that new folder is the document root, so that when we refresh, we'll be using that new document root. All right, so with that, we're again pointing to the admin URL and seeing if we get the finish up button. And I've done something wrong again in fine fashion.
So in this case, like, Craft is basically able to connect to your database or not, and for whatever reason thinks that it's not installed yet. So it's probably hinting at there's something in your .env file that
Yes,
some
I think
setting in there that wasn't correctly ported over.
This is a good one. I think it's this one right here.
Yes, the table prefix, yes.
So in this situation, and let me open my SQL program. So in Craft 2, we had every table prefixed with the Craft prefix. By default in Craft 3, this is no longer the case. Craft gets rid of that Craft prefix.
Yeah, and the reasoning there is prefixes if you're running Craft alongside other applications in the same database. And obviously at this point, like, that's not usually going to be a limitation of the hosting environment. The only times where that would be is on a really low-end shared hosting, which, if you're on that, you're probably also not running Craft in the first place. So we just figured it made sense at this point to drop the default.
Is there anyone that's going to be running PHP 7 and still have that limitation?
Yeah, I mean,
I sure hope not.
some bizarre, yeah, who knows?
All right, so we'll update our table prefix to craft underscore, which was our previous prefix, and now we'll try again. And again, we've made it back to our update screen. Great. So those, I think in summary, those are the two different paths we can take with a few hiccups and a short debate. And really both are fairly simple. Simple paths. I actually am happy we ran into so many little hiccups, because generally speaking, path problems are about 50% of the problems on the internet or more. Just not fully understanding which variable you're using and how it's mapping. So in my experience, most of the updates, when there are issues, they are those similar issues to the ones we ran up into here, just overlooking a small step to get a path or a variable named correctly in your environment.
Everything is paths and permissions.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and hit update now, and then we can talk about what's happening with the update. Oh, I'm so glad we. Oh no, yeah, there's a few errors, so I'm glad we got this one too. So, what is this one? What is this one telling us, Brandon?
So in Craft 2, we had all this code for basically giving Craft its own PHP-based database backup script. And it was nice for small projects where backing up an entire database with PHP seemed like a reasonable thing. But in the reality of things, like a lot of Craft projects end up, graduating to hundreds of thousands of elements, and it just bogs down the system, and it leads to support, it leads to server breaking, or leads to updates not working correctly. And we just decided that the time for us trying to be a database backup tool was behind us. And so in Craft 3, there's basically a new config setting called backup command, and it is set to MySQL dump by default if you're running MySQL, and if you're running Postgres, then it's going to be set to pgdump. And if you're running something like MAMP, then that might not actually be available for you. So that's where you get this error. Basically, Craft's saying, hey, your server, your system is configured to run backups on update, and yet the command that I'm trying to run came back unsuccessful.
Okay. And what, actually, this is an error we ran into with a site we have on a fairly secure server setup that didn't allow the MySQL command to be run on the server. What options do people have for backups if a server doesn't allow the command to be run on the server?
You can back up manually using, a MySQL client like SQL Pro or Queryus or PHP-MyAdmin. Or you can add MySQL dump to your system. Or there's actually, again, the config setting is just called backup command, and you can actually type whatever you want in there. So if you have some other means of running a command on your system that would back up your database, then you can just go in and update that config setting to run that script instead, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be MySQL dump. It could be some script that triggers a whole server backup. It's kind of up to you. Theoretically, someone could even write a ye module or something like that that supplies another database backup tool that's written in PHP. And use that as a fallback.
Is the requirement met by this required? I guess what is the requirement in the docs here for the new backup?
So we don't consider this to be a requirement because it's not actually going to prevent anything in Craft from working.
Okay.
Really, this is like if you want Craft to go ahead and run the database backup before updating. Then it's kind of this extra feature, that you can enable, but it's not. There's nothing in the system that's going to break if you can't run MySQL dump. And so basically, like, in the real world, when you get this error here when updating, I'd recommend just for now, like go into your database client and create a manual backup, and then click continue. And then if it's a production environment where you do really want to make sure that every update is coming with the database backup, then just go in and figure out how to fix it, figure out how to get MySQL dump working, talk to your host and see why it's not working. Most production hosts are going to have MySQL dump available though.
And Brad, I think, wants me to mention that this is Brad Bell from Pixel and Tonic, that the PHP-based backup also only supported primitive lowest common denominator data types. So
there were some special columns for things like various indexes and things like the mapping plugins would use that we wouldn't actually be able to back up.
Yeah, like spatial data types would be ignored, and I would imagine the problem has gotten more complicated now that Postgres is supported as well.
Yeah.
Like if you wanted to write this in PHP,
right,
then you would have kind of a fork of that.
Yeah, exactly. It was a decision between porting 500 lines of code to start working on Postgres as well, in a situation where we already knew there were all these problems, versus just, hey, you know what? Most of these environments already have a tool that does this, and it's written in C, and it's talking directly to the database, and it happens in a fraction of the time. We might as well just start using that.
And Ben, the environment you're talking about, it doesn't allow for the execution of MySQL from the command line, but what about MySQL dump? Like I would think that would be
I guess it was MySQL dump. It's whatever command that was being used.
I would think that MySQL dump would be a reasonably safe thing to allow, whereas MySQL itself would be potentially more destructive. But
right. Yeah.
It's worth noting, if anybody else runs into this, that the Craft interface actually does not make it clear that the command is not on the server. Or I guess we had to dig into from the UI, it's not clear. You have to get down to like logs or server logs or something before you see that MySQL dump is failing. The UI kind of just says that like database didn't back up. So This
Yeah,
was
and
kind of our introduction to even learning that this change had happened, not really understanding why the button in the UI was not doing anything.
yeah, so maybe it's worth us updating this error to actually show, the command that it attempted to run. It would have to just be like, here's the full command that was executed, because we don't, again, it's a config setting, so we don't really know if it was, if they were using the stock or something else. And I guess that one concern there is like the command that gets run will probably have your MySQL password right there, so we'll have to make sure that we sanitize it before displaying it. But yeah, it would make sense that we do something better there.
All right. Well, I guess the one other kind of upgrade thing I see, and this might be more when upgrading plugins, but maybe I'll mention it now, is an upgrade is already in progress. Do you want to continue? I'm not sure we'll see that during this upgrade process.
You could simulate it if you go into your database, and then just set the maintenance column in your info table to 1.
Okay.
It's already there. So
okay.
just reload the page and you'll get it.
All right, there we go. Update number 2 that you see a lot. So what's going on here?
So this is a defense mechanism that we've added in Craft 3. In Craft 2, there was this potential for 2 different people, to be editing the control panel at the same time, and then someone deploys an update, and then both of them get this notification, and both of them click finish up at the same time, and both of them are then simultaneously upgrading Craft, which can lead to all kinds of sticky situations. So due to race conditions between migration, all kinds of fun stuff. So basically with Craft 3, we've decided, okay, let's do our best to kind of broadcast to other potential updaters that it looks like someone else has already started this process, and therefore you'd only be inclined to click continue if you know that was you. So
in this case, when I start the update, Craft, you start that process by toggling maintenance column in the database to 1. Then if Andrew starts an update right after me, you're checking if that maintenance column is active or not before you're triggering his update.
Whoa! Don't drag me into this.
Yeah, exactly. That's the idea. So it's a scary error, and that's intentional, because we want you to take pause and make sure that no one else is updating the system right then before clicking continue. But in your case, it's a local install. You have pretty strong reliability that no one else is updating this, and that it was in fact you that tried it beforehand. So you can go ahead and click continue.
All right, we will continue. And yes, we also don't worry about the database update. We're full of risk today. All right, so now there's a lot of things that change in Craft 3. I don't want to focus on all of those today. What I'm hoping we can focus on today are kind of the more core level things that are changing around the files and around the database. So let's, I guess we can log into our new site and confirm everything is still working. And all right.
That's just because the first time you hit the thing, it was thinking it was uninstalled, so it hit the installer.
Oh, so the redirect path was the wrong redirect path from the first action.
It started storing in your session that, like, once they log in, remember to put them over to the installer, because that's what they requested. So
okay, great. All right, so we've got our site updated. So let's start talking about what happened. Let's start maybe, well, I guess the folder level. Maybe this was covered last week with the composer discussion a bit. We talk a lot about the folder structure. So in our second step here when we didn't keep the original folder structure. We actually went through a lot of what changed with the current folder structure. And I guess the key things to note is the folders are now top level. Web by default, web is now the default, not public. We now have these composer files and vendor folder. Craft CMS app folder has moved into vendor, Craft CMS, CMS, and various other packages here. So if you are curious to explore that, you're now looking at it through the package system.
Craft being very humble. It's now on the same level as all the other composer packages that are in there. You know, it's just another dependency.
The .env, the configuration setup has changed to .env. And then I guess there's a couple others that are a little harder to see and might not be obvious immediately. We've got a couple new app files here that might be worth mentioning. There's now a new app.php, as well as if you decide to manage your assets at the config level, there's a new volumes.php here. So maybe that gets into kind of the, well, maybe this and the next thing get into this question of aliases in place of environment variables. The other thing that's changed is that images are no longer stored, or user images are no longer stored in the storage folder. They've been moved out into the public folder as well, I guess.
Well, Ben, let's cover one of the biggest freakouts, which is go back to the admin CP.
Okay.
And it says, oh my God, my rich text field is gone. Why did you take it away, Craft? So, no, I mean, I've seen a lot of people, you know, having that kind of question on both on the Craft CMS Slack and also on Stack Exchange. And now, Brandon, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is basically, so Redactor has just become a plugin, and the idea is to give people a choice in that if they want Redactor for rich text, they can use it. If they want CK Editor for rich text, they can use that. And if the new thing comes down the pike, they could potentially use that, right?
Yeah, theoretically. The big thing there is that we just, you know, especially we kind of got screwed a little bit, I guess, with Redactor back in Craft 2 days. You might remember in Craft 2.5, we had to upgrade Redactor to Redactor Roman numeral 2. And the reason for that, we were kind of in between a rock and a hard place. It was a breaking update for Redactor, so it broke a lot of people's rich text configs and all that kind of stuff. But had we kept it with the version we had, then we only were looking at maybe 1 or 2 months of actual support left. And the nature of these rich text fields are that they need to be updated constantly to keep up to date with browser bugs and browser you know, API changes and all that kind of stuff. And so, you know, had we were kind of between a rock and a hard place. Either we keep the current version of Redactor and you know, it's only a matter of time before that becomes increasingly buggy. Not to mention the fact that like all the existing bugs were certainly not going to get fixed at that point. Or we keep it, you know, up to date with their new release and break people's rich text implementations and require everyone moving to Craft 2.5 to make some changes there. We chose that route because you know, otherwise we'd all be wishing we had at this point. But it kind of shed some light on like, you know, maybe we shouldn't be including this kind of volatile dependency as a part of Craft itself. And, you know, boy, had we just released this as a plugin to begin with, then when this thing happened, it'd be no big deal. We wouldn't even have to do it alongside a Craft update. We could just release, you know, the 2.0 of the plugin, and people could choose to update at their leisure, you know. And in fact, the Redactor plugin that we released has already gotten a 2.0 at this point. Redactor 3 came out a few weeks ago, and just earlier this week, I think, we released you know, Redactor 2.0.0 for our plugin, which is another breaking change. But it, you know, again, it's not it's done in a way now where people can update that when they're ready for it, when they're ready to deal with the breaking changes that come along with this major update to the plugin.
Great. And we will go, I do want to dig into plugins here in a minute. I had it in another item or two here.
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we are going to address that, and we're going to look at how we solve this. Before we get to that, I wanted to, I guess just ask, are there other things at the file level that we need to consider updating before we start getting into the database? And the final item on my list is assets. There's some things that changed with how we're storing user photos.
Yeah, so the one thing you do need to change right off the bat is if you want to show user photos on the front end, then you need to go into settings and then into volumes, actually, or assets, I'm sorry, assets, and edit your user photos volume, which is something that the Craft 3 upgrade would have created for you. And you'll need to adjust the settings here. So first of all, like basically all your photos, they didn't actually move. They're still in the same place they were, which is in your storage / user photos folder, or at least they're very close to where they used to be. And the idea there is like, at this point, that's just a regular asset volume rather than something that's, managed by Craft internals. So you can go ahead and move it anywhere you want. You could put it wherever your other volumes are. You could move all the files over to S3 and start setting this up as an S3 volume. Point is, it's a volume now, so you need to move that folder to where you actually want it to live, and then you need to go into this user photos volume settings and make sure that it's got the right paths in there.
Okay.
And also make sure that it's set to have your.
And we have, I guess, a new default Craft. A new default Craft path is the web root base path. So I believe we can update this to web root.
Yep.
And then our assets / user photos.
Yeah, and then just go up and hit that light switch that says assets have public URLs, and then you can kind of do the same thing there.
And so web root is referring to the base path in the system, and at web is referring to index.php, where index.php is being served from.
Yeah, they're references to the same folder. Just one of them's a URL and one's a file path.
Yeah, so one's going to have HTTP in it, and one's just going to have the folder path.
Yeah. So just think of, web root is usually a reference to a file system directory. It's a web root is like considered like the folder on your computer that web traffic is directed to. So when you say the @web root alias is going to be a file system, and the just plain @web is going to be the URL.
Okay.
Which is a little confusing because the directory it's serving out of is called web.
Yes. Well, that's the big reason. That's the biggest reason why we decided to rename the folder from public to web, is because these are actually aliases that Yi is setting automatically for you based on the current HTTP request, and so we liked the consistency there of having the things that are web and web root in the system refer to a folder that's actually called web.
Now, yeah, and it's really nice to start being able to manage these system assets elsewhere. Now, I think I saw somebody post in Craft Slack the other day, they were trying to configure their Docker setup, and they were still running into the rebrand. The logo at the login screen was still not, they were having to do something a little bit different than that. Is the logo at the login screen still managed within Craft?
Yeah, I mean, so it's not an asset, if that's what you're asking.
Okay.
There's, I wasn't there for that conversation, but I'm guessing it was something related to like a multi-server, load balanced environment.
Yeah, it was a deployment where they were losing that file in the deployment because they weren't excluding or something.
Yeah, and so there is Craft does let you customize the location of the entire storage folder. So, if you have something like that, but you have a place where you can point persistent files, then you could just tell Craft to use that place instead of this location. But
Okay.
yeah.
All right. All right. Well, I think that kind of covers the changes at the file level. So now let's start getting into the database. And I guess I do want to get to the plugin topic here, but I was going to start with just the general question of kind of what has changed in the database for Craft 3.
Yeah.
So.
Not a lot, honestly. There's one thing is asset sources have been renamed to volumes. So we've updated the table names accordingly. So it's volume folders and volumes rather than asset folders and asset sources.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that it used to also be called asset files, has now been renamed to just plain assets.
Okay.
And then there's some folders for new functionality and things like that. There's a user preferences folder that didn't exist before. Craft ID tokens.
Yeah, I think it looks like there's a resource paths folder for assets as well. Is this where Craft's storing those default paths?
This is an attempt for Craft to so one of the big changes in Craft 3 is that we're using this new feature in Ye2 called the Asset Manager, which is unrelated to Craft's own concept of what an asset is. The Asset Manager is basically a publishing system that takes files that are generated dynamically, or they're part of some composer dependencies source files, and then publishes them on demand into your web folder, into a place where browsers can access them. So if you're setting everything up correctly,
that's the CPU resource.
Exactly. So if you're setting everything up correctly, then all of all the CSS and JavaScript and all the kind of stuff that's running the control panel, for example, like that's all going to live above your web root, in the vendor/craftcns/cms folder. And there's no way for a browser to access that file directly, or there shouldn't be. And if there is, then you set it up wrong. So basically, the CMS has to go and figure out, how are we going to make these things publicly available? In Craft 2, we had this whole resources concept where basically a request can go in and say like, hey, I want to, give me the resource with this specific path. And then Craft would, that would actually hit Craft, and then Craft would have to, inspect the path that was requested and see if it was a valid resource path. And if not, it'll get plugins involved and see if any plugin wants to try and take it over. And it worked. It was, relatively reliable, but not very performant because ultimately PHP was not built to serve static resources. That's a lot, having every single file, every single CSS file and JavaScript and everything in the control panel kick up a PHP system and database connection and all that kind of stuff just to serve a static file up the file system was not very efficient. So anyways, this, I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but there are complications when it comes to load balanced environments and stuff like that. And this table is part of our attempt to make that work more reliably.
Got it. Yeah. Okay, great. That gives us a little more context. There's a few other folder or database tables I just wanted to comment. Craft ID tokens. I assume this relates to the plugin store and everything going on with that. We'll notice that all the I18N tables have disappeared in favor of _sites tables. So anything that has, is it multi-site support? Is that the right way to say it?
Yeah. So, I mean, the Craft 2 version of multi-site was the locales, and that was like a very internationalization focused implementation of multi-site. And so it made sense to kind of go with that I18N theme everywhere. But in Craft 3, they're more abstract. It could mean internationalization. It could mean a sister company. It could mean a landing page. It could mean a million things. So we've gone with renaming locales to sites. And table names have followed suit.
Yeah. So those are noticeable differences. The email messages table seems to now be called system messages.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's just a preference change more than anything, probably.
Yes.
Tasks has been changed to queue. So I understand the jobs functionality in Craft 3 is a lot different than tasks in Craft 2. I guess that's a topic for a separate time, but you'll notice that table has changed.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? Rack space access is this one? Was this a default?
That must be a holdover from your Craft 2 install.
Okay, that must have just been an accidental one. Okay. Okay, in template cache criteria is changed to template cache queries.
Yeah.
I guess just a naming choice again. And users preferences, is this enabling some of the new user? I guess we have more customization of user settings in Craft 3. I'm not sure if user preferences relate to that.
There's just we got tired of adding more columns to the user table.
Okay. All right. Well, that brings us to plugins now. And so as far as plugins are concerned, they add their own tables to the mix when they need them.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as Craft is concerned, it really just cares about the plugins in the plugins table, keeping track of what's installed or not installed. And it keeps track of the plugins or I guess this isn't plugin specific, but this includes any migrations that were run by a plugin. So when we do perform updates, we know if a particular migration has run or not yet.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what I guess then, as we now have hit upgrade on Craft, what has happened with our plugins?
Not a lot. The main thing is the handles would have been reformatted into this kebab casing that you see here. But beyond that,
Okay. Now, and you also, it looks here that these plugins, I'm sorry if I didn't hear you. It looks like these plugins are enabled as well. Is this how is this possible?
So this data will just basically be identical to what it was in Craft 2.
Okay. And so since we haven't installed any plugins in Craft 3, is this setting just ignored at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, so basically this indicates that in Craft 2 you did have these plugins installed and enabled. We've touched up the handle to match the new handle format for Craft 3, but beyond that we've left the data alone. And the idea is that basically right now it's as if you had installed it in Craft 3 even perhaps, but maybe the files aren't there. Maybe you've deleted the files for some reason. So
Okay.
that, as far as Craft is concerned, yes, these are installed and enabled, and then it's just a matter of getting the files in place before they can actually start being executed.
Okay, so if I go to my plugins tab, I see nothing's available here any longer. Mm-hmm. And so then the first place I go if I have plugins probably is the plugin store.
That'd be a good start.
All right. Now, back to Andrew's first comment here on our dashboard. That's probably the easiest place to demo it. We are trying to output our redactor fields, and they're just not available at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
So Craft is just telling us can't find the related class. So let's search for Redactor, and we will grab that and install it. And now Craft is adding Redactor to Composer, mm-hmm. adding the files there. And does it change anything else in the? Do any of the fields that we had that were Redactor fields change in any way?
So it will, on install, run a migration that finds any fields that used to be RichText fields in Craft 2, and it will automatically convert those over to its own Redactor field type. So okay. There is that. And that happens in that very quick step at the very end of that installation process where it said installing the plugin.
I could have probably called that out ahead of time. If we find a rich text field here in the database.
Yeah, so beforehand it would have said craft/fields/RichText, which is just basically the would have been the automated conversion that the Craft 3 migration would have done.
we can see what it might have looked like with the Sprout fields here. I had an email field and a phone field, and they still have that old class name that no longer is relevant to Craft 3. So Redactor was similar.
Yeah. Well, so Redactor in that case, Craft actually, an earlier version of Craft 3 was still including the rich text field, and so there is a migration somewhere back there that never got changed that continues to update the type from rich text over to craft/fields/rich text, which is like the fully qualified class name that we're using in Craft 3. So basically, that's kind of the starting point that you would have seen, and that explains why that error was showing that full class name that doesn't exist.
Got it.
Whereas now, yeah, they've been changed to craft/redactor/field, which is the new class name.
All right, great. Another fun one. Redactor plugin not found source. Yeah,
so this is actually an interesting one. When you update to Redactor 3 or Redactor 2, I'm sorry, the plugin Redactor 2. If you were coming from Redactor 1.0, an earlier version of the same plugin, there's a migration that would have run that would have tried to update your Redactor configs. And I think this is actually just a bug that we're not even trying to do it when you do a fresh install of the plugin. So I'm actually going to make a note that we should update that.
Now, is this, you mentioned the config, is this a config setting issue?
Yeah, so basically there's a couple Redactor plugins that have been removed in their newer version. So
source right here
source
is
being,
a
source being
plugin
the one
that I had in the last. There we go. All right. Looks like something changed in the user interface there, but all right. So that's the first thing that happens with Redactor. Now, what happens if I decided I didn't want to use Redactor and was going to use CKEditor in Craft 3, and I just went into my fields and I changed them? Would those Redactor fields stay the same in the database, or they get updated to CKEditor instead?
So the process would be you need to install the plugin and then go through and manually change the field type over to CKEditor instead of Redactor.
You'd still install Redactor first, then switch it over?
It would be up to you. It'd be up to you which route you go. It's the difference is that since CKEditor is still an alpha editor, we haven't released a stable version of that plugin yet. And there's still a lot of work left before we're ready to do that. We didn't want to go so far as to automatically convert all your existing rich text type fields over to itself, like we do with Redactor. Redactor will make that assumption. We weren't comfortable making that assumption quite yet with CKEditor. So you would need to manually go and convert the ones that you want to use CKEditor on for now.
All right, great. All right, well then I guess, yeah, next in a similar plugin situation, I guess I have Sprout fields installed. Now it also runs several it runs several migrations that affect the tables, the class names that are available here, and I guess as a plugin developer, you just need to make sure you're aware where your plugin class name is referenced in whatever table it's referenced in, and make sure that you're updating those to the new format if Craft isn't doing that for you.
Yeah, exactly. It's on you as the plugin developer to make sure that, you know, on the upgrade you're going through and updating all the old data.
Okay, maybe that's done already. So we can see those got updated to the new path they use. And all right, yeah, and you'll see the phone field we add, actually in Craft 3, we made it an international phone field and the whole format changed. So we actually update that in the process to be a plain text field through the migration. So there's still a new phone field that's more advanced if you want a specific phone field, but there was really no way for us to upgrade it successfully. So we revert to a plain text field. So you might see some plugins doing these types of things as you upgrade, kind of, I guess in similar fashion to Pixel and Tonic, moving Redactor from core, getting things aligned with the new system that work well. I think we keep those in mind. So I guess then, so that's a simple, I guess I think that's simple. We just updated a plugin. It works, and that was pretty painless. So now, what about the situation where we were using Sprout SEO? I did this one, Andrew, because you were on this as well. You want to upgrade to Craft 3. Sprout SEO is not available yet. What do? Well, you either send us a support ticket and ask when it's going to be available, and we let you know what we know, or you come here to your plugin store and you can find what other things are available and kind of map out whatever path you'd need to take to install an existing plugin for Craft 3 and get the rest of your code base updated or database updated to use that new plugin. So are there anything else you can do with plugins that aren't available that I'm not thinking of?
I think that's it. Like you know, if you are going to switch to a different plugin, obviously check with the developer or look through their documentation and see if there's an upgrade path available. Figure out what steps are going to be involved there, because no two plugins are necessarily storing anything the same way. So
yeah, it's not going to be a one-to-one mapping at all. So it's going to be changes to consider.
Yeah, Ben, I want to stay on your Christmas card list, so I didn't write a migration from Sprout to SEO Map.
Yeah, you can use Sprout import if you do.
Always be selling. I like it.
All right, so that gets us to a few different plugin scenarios that I feel can be a little intimidating at first. There's a lot of things changing as we upgrade Craft, and it's not always, while it might be simple at the end of the day, we're good at making up big stories in our head of why a particular plugin is unique and might not work when we try to update it. But hopefully that gives a little more clarity as to what's Craft doing and how plugins are handling the update process.
And Ben, real quick, did you cover anything with the gitignore file and what has changed in terms of what you might want to ignore or not ignore in Craft 3 versus Craft 2?
We did discuss this in the Composer hangout last week.
And you covered the CP resources, for instance. I've seen a few people that have been asking about that, like, you know, should I be ignoring CP resources? But if you covered it, then forget it.
Yeah, so the default project, as far as that goes, actually comes with a gitignore file in the CP resources folder. So you don't actually have to exclude it explicitly. You do probably want the folder in Git, just none of the contents. And that's why we took that approach.
Right.
And so Craft will generate this content anytime it needs it.
Right. Yeah, and with the exception of gitignore, you're safe to delete anything in there whenever you want.
Great. All right. All right, so then let's move on to plugins now. So we kind of started getting into the next topic as we were looking at plugins there, but what steps does a plugin need to take to plan the migration to Craft 3?
I mean, the first step is going to be to think of it as, you're going to be better off thinking of it as like you're going to rewrite your plugin for Craft 3 rather than that you're trying to upgrade it to Craft 3. The code base is at a high level similar to how things used to be, but the closer you get to the details, the more you realize that basically every line of your plugin is probably going to need to be changed in some way, including how you structure the plugin and how it registers components in the system and all that kind of stuff. And so honestly, the best starting point is going to be to go over to pluginfactory.io and kind of go about it like you're creating a new plugin. Pick the features that you want that your plugin was supplying before. The general feature categories are all the same, with the exception that Craft 3 has more options. And then once you've got that, start looking through the sample code that you're going to get auto scaffolded for you, and kind of go about it that way.
Yeah, and we have gone in. We have a handful of other Hangouts if you're interested in kind of some of the plugin dev. I think it's still a little. Plugin Factory is a great template kind of the overview of everything right now. I think for plugin development, and we're still kind of waiting on more articles and courses to kind of emerge on building plugins for Craft 3. The thing I'd like to focus on here is the kind of migration question. So as we get all that updated and we need to get things upgraded nice and seamless, we're considering what's changed in the database and what we're updating. But one of those things that's changed in our plugins is we now have, I guess, a new type of migration we have an install migration, and then we have a normal migration. Yeah, I guess we call it.
So Ben, if I could real quick, I mean, the one thing that I would add to what Brendan mentioned, I totally agree with what he said about, look at it from the point of view of rewriting it for Craft 3 if you're working on a plugin. But I think it's also a great opportunity for you to, look at your code and see things that maybe you could do better. And you've always wanted to, every programmer always wants, you figure out how to do it right after you've done it, right? And then you've got this impulse that you really want to go back and redo it right. Perfect opportunity to do it. And then also, really good idea to look at the way that Yi2 is doing stuff and leverage kind of their, if not their code, then their patterns, and I think you'll end up with something that is going to be a whole lot better in the long run. So
yeah, we've found ourselves in many cases just porting a plugin from Craft 2 to Craft 3. And at first you're just getting your head around what's going on. You're just trying to get things over and loading properly again. And then you have a time to pause and look, and you'll realize that like half of the code in some method isn't even necessary anymore because you just could extend a new base Craft class or base E class that helps you do a lot of that stuff in a more familiar way.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to get you off track. I just want to add that.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. All right, so then let's talk about these two types of migrations. We have install migrations and normal I don't know what to distinguish them as, other migrations. The install migration runs once. Is that correct?
The install migration is basically it's only halfway correctly named. There's just like any other migration, there's an up function and a down function. And in this case, when you're installing the plugin, then its up function is going to get called, and when you're uninstalling a plugin, its down function is going to get called. And it's kind of up to you whether you want to support, whether you want to remove things on uninstall or how you want to handle uninstalling your plugin. This is just kind of a special case migration, though. I mean, the rest of anything else in that folder is going to be regular, more normal, more like Craft 2. And I guess it's worth mentioning that like it's actually your plugin that ultimately calls this file, not Craft. So your plugin has an install function, and that's the thing that Craft cares about. So if you look at the base / plugin that your plugin is extending.
Pull up
And Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the scenario that Ben was presenting where he already had some plugins installed, if he then, in the DB, it said like Sprout Notes was installed. If he then installed that plugin via, Composer Require, it will not run that install migration, right? Because it already thinks it's installed, right?
No, so Composer installing is different than Craft installing.
Right. What I mean is I could swear, and maybe my memory is poor on this, but I could swear there was a case where if the plugin was installed on the Craft 2 site, the install migration for the Craft 3 plugin does not run.
Right, exactly. Yeah, okay. Because again, like Craft already knows that your plugin is installed. Right. It considers it to continue to be installed, whether or not it was originally installed in Craft 2 or 3. It just doesn't matter.
So the install migration is something that will run at most once, but possibly 0 times, right?
Well, I mean, so the idea would be that your plugin did whatever it needed to do to install itself.
Right.
Back in the Craft 2 days, if it was already in there.
I'm just mentioning it because
Yeah.
there might be someone who shall remain nameless who spent a bunch of time going, why the heck is my install migration not running?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, if Craft already considers your plugin installed, then
Right.
then at that point it's more of an update problem rather than an installation problem.
Yeah, so the install migration essentially is get to square one of where the current plugin should be with the database schema if it's
Right.
being installed for the first time. And then if you're upgrading to from Craft 2 to Craft 3, all of these migrations that you have, or whatever ones you add to the initial update process, are the ones that are going to be run to get the database from the Craft 2 version of the database up to the Craft 3 version of the database.
Yeah, I mean, whatever new migrations are there that weren't there before, basically. Right. So presumably, if you're doing a Craft 3 port of a plugin, then you're going to have at least one migration in there that does whatever it needs to do to make sure that your plugins, existing installations of your plugin, get updated correctly. If your plugin doesn't add any schema, and doesn't have any classes that would end up getting referenced in the database anywhere, like if you've just got a simple utility function that just does some random thing without ever affecting the database, then you might not even need one. It's theoretically there's a case where that's true. So
okay, great. All right, well then let's then talk about kind of, so I think we can, I think the testing of migrations has become, I don't know, mentally I feel a little more off base with it. We had our workflow in Craft 2 where we had one version of the plugin on one branch and we switched to a new branch of the other version, the newer version of the plugin, and we'd trigger the migration we wanted. The challenge with migrations is they kind of get stuck in the database, and now with Composer, you have situations where you might need to even be running Composer commands to change which version of the plugin you're running if you want to be testing a migration that you're doing. I guess so. What have we learned about the best way to test? So like, let's say for the plugin developer, the user runs the migration, everything goes swimmingly, they get updated, they only run the migration once. The plugin developer, they start their migration and it's a terrible mess. The first time they try, something goes wrong, then they need to backtrack, try again, and try to fix that problem. They have to run migrations multiple times. So what does a good workflow look like for this in Craft 3?
Make a database backup and keep restoring it whenever you want to restart things.
Yeah, that's exactly what I do. I mean, so I already have scripts set up where I sync down. So I mean, all I do is when I write a migration, I pull the database down from like production, where presumably it doesn't have, the update with the new version, and I run it, and if it doesn't work, then I just pull it down again.
Well,
And
what if you're just working on a plugin locally, though, Andrew? So there's no, this is your test database,
so
right?
just before you do it, just do a MySQL dump, and have your finger on the trigger ready to restore it. Whenever you need to do it. And one other small thing is I have switched over to putting the schema version as updating it in the plugin file itself, rather than in the composer.json, just to avoid there being any kind of caching of that information. And it seems to be a little bit easier that way.
So yeah, adding, I guess we might be doing it the other way here. So that's a good example. So here we can define the schema version in Composer.json. And when you do that, Craft will actually cache that value in this plugins, Craft CMS plugins.php file. So if we look here, we'll see schema version is based right here in this plugins.php file. So yeah, so Andrew is saying ditch putting it here. And we've started to do this in some of our plugins to do with a handful of those variables that seem to get cached, and move it to somewhere here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in general, I would recommend putting it here. Most of the only things that need to go in that Composer JSON file are the kinds of things that Craft wants to display on the plugin index page. And having them in there means that Craft can display that information even if the plugin wasn't installed in the first place, without actually invoking any plugin code. So you're missing a $sign, that's it.
Okay, that's thanks. All right, great. Yeah, so I guess we found similar things. You can replace the whole database, or really all Craft cares about is seeing that the version of the plugin you're running is lower than the version that it thinks you're updating to. So you could even edit this table in the database directly and just decrement it and reload, and Craft will do it. Or if you are storing your things in this plugin.php, you could edit this PHP file directly and tweak your schema version to kind of trigger the action as well.
You can also run migrations from the terminal, especially if you went this, this route with using the new directory structure. And if you do that, you can run plugin migrations independently of changing schema version. It will, if you run plugin migrations, it will make sure that the schema version is up to date with whatever's in your plugin's config. But you can run those migrations without changing your schema version, and it'll still pick them up from the terminal, and it'll still run them. And then only once you're ready to commit things can would you actually update the schema version.
Got it. Is there documentation on that in the docs? Or?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, if you are doing the tweak numbers version of this versus the replace whole database, note that when you do run a migration, it gets added to this table. So if you want to rerun it, just tweaking the number won't be enough. You also have to delete the record of the migration from this table to get it to run again.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah, or I guess the other option is you could just always throw an exception or return false at the end of your safe up function. If you're just trying to make things work and stepping through it to make sure things are working correctly with Xdebug or something, then as long as the migration returns false, then it'll try to undo any changes you've made. That said, it won't work if you've made schema changes and you're running MySQL because MySQL automatically commits whatever database transaction is currently in effect as soon as an actual schema change goes in, as opposed to just changing rows of data.
All right, great. All right, well then the next topic on my list, and maybe the last one for today, is, so now we've updated our plugin to Craft 3. We're happy, everything's working, and then the first thing we get in, where is my, yes, then all of a sudden a user tells us our plugin's broken when I'm using PostgreSQL. And we realize, oh, Craft supports a whole new database type out there. What might we be doing in our plugin that doesn't work now with Postgres?
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'm new to Postgres. I hear great things about it. I'm looking forward to working with it a lot. I guess the first thing I'd like to mention is, the first question to me is like, well, how do I even access and manage a Postgres database? This morning I dove into it for the first time, found a tutorial online, and was up and running in about 30 minutes, just getting it set up on my local computer and installing Craft with the Postgres option instead of the MySQL option. So I felt it went pretty smoothly, if that could help give anybody else some confidence out there. Now, the next question is, well, how do I actually even see what's inside my Postgres database? Do I have to do this all from the command line, or is there a nice tool out there that can do it for me? If you're a PHP Storm user, PHP Storm actually supports database connections in your projects and connects to Postgres databases. So if you just add a data source for PostgreSQL, you can add your connection info in there, and right here in your project, you'll be able to start exploring the database that was created for Postgres. So I found that as a good starting point to start getting involved here. So I guess what I want to discuss here more is like, so I visit this tab of my plugin that this issue came in on, and And we get this error. Select group concat type details not working. So I'm doing something with an SQL query that shouldn't be done, or doesn't work in both MySQL and Postgres. So I guess from a top level, how do I need to behave so that Craft, what I do in my plugins, plays nicely with these different databases that Craft supports?
Yeah. So for a lot of stuff, you don't need to do anything. If you're doing, normal database queries, normal inserts, normal updates, Craft already has, everything should be run through Craft's own or Yee's own, database abstraction layer, where basically queries are built with this query class or the query builder class, and defined in an abstract way where only when you're executing do those get normalized into actual SQL, and the SQL that gets spit out is going to be based on whether you're using MySQL or Postgres. So for the most part, you shouldn't have to worry about it. In your case, it looks like you're calling this group concat function. I'm actually not familiar with that, but I'm assuming in this case that that's like a MySQL specific function. So I guess the next step would be to Google search, concat for PostgreSQL and figure out the chances are there's going to be a Stack Overflow post somewhere where someone has shown exactly how to reproduce that functionality on PostgreSQL. So at that point, you could just run a condition, that says if this is Postgres, then do this. If it's MySQL, do that. And you could kind of try and formulate as much of your query ahead of time as you can. So, like for example, you've got the select. So maybe just delete that one part. Keep the IDs, keep type, keep count. Keep whatever you can that's going to work across both in that select. And then drop the all at the end. And so basically say query, yeah, exactly.
And then I could have my if statement.
So well, I'm saying you would keep your select there just without the one thing, just without that one aspect.
So just removing this one.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, still needs some love.
Yeah, and what Brandon said before is something that has been really useful for me. Is like if you use the query builder, like it's just going to work.
Yeah, for the most part, unless you're doing a function. Like if you have parentheses in your query somewhere, then that's a pretty good indication that you might be doing something that's going to result in raw SQL, and you need to make sure that raw SQL is compatible.
Yeah, but we even found some like crazy edge cases that we did not think it would work, but it actually did. They actually did a pretty good job abstracting it, and then if you use that, whenever they support the next database type, like in theory, it's probably going to work.
Yeah, or at the very least, you'll have a couple conditions you could search throughout your code base and figure out the places where you've had to go in and do something that's database driver specific. So we know for sure, like if we were to do a third one, it'd be a lot faster than the first time because we already have established those areas where we need to look at. So the condition that you're looking for there, if you want to do if Postgres, would be if Craft app.
Okay.
I don't know if you actually wanted to type this out or not.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Got autocomplete.
.db is Postgres. Get it.
Okay.
Get is MySQL. Get is Postgres. Whatever you want to
do. Get is. Got it. All right.
So.
And then I just need to find that, or revisit this whole thing and take a different approach that follows the conventions of the query builder better.
Exactly, but yeah, do that and then do an else and do add SQL or add select for MySQL as well, and then you should be able to run it and it would work across both things.
All right.
That's the general idea.
Yeah, are there, I guess the main thing to know about Postgres is really just get familiar with this query builder and rely on it, like Andrew
Yeah,
said. So.
there's basically two forms of query builders in this thing. There's the query class that you're using here, and this is used for select queries.
Okay.
Similar to other queries as well, which are also selects. And then there's also like the craftdb.create command, and then there's all these various more specific query functions for inserting data or updating data and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but that's part of the reason why the whole query builder thing exists to begin with, right? I mean, part of it is for convenience sake, but also, I mean, part of the reason for it existing is to abstract this kind of thing, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Does Ye support other databases already that you're just not
They do. They've got about 7, I think. I can't tell you right now whether we'll add another one or not. Postgres was definitely the one that people were asking for. We've seen a couple requests for SQL Server from more enterprise type environments, so that's potentially a consideration down the road. But I think we'd have to have a really good reason to add another one. Like with Postgres, there were some significant performance improvements that you get with that. There's it's potentially a lot cheaper if you're on certain environments like Heroku, which don't even offer a native first-party MySQL option. And there's some nice features that it adds over MySQL, like much better Unicode support, better full text support, lots of really cool stuff. So there were a lot of really good reasons to introduce Postgres support from our perspective. I don't know if we'll find such a convincing argument for anything else at this point.
Yeah.
I've run into a surprising number of people that have been using Postgres, which is kind of cool. Like I thought it would be, an option that not a whole lot of people would choose, but I've seen a number of people using it. And the cool thing is, like, from a craft perspective, like, everything just works.
Yeah. Yeah, we've been using it on our end for the CraftNet stuff, and it's a joy to work with. The one thing that above all else that I love is, unlike MySQL, it'll still let you make schema changes within a transaction. So you really can, if you're trying to do some pretty intense migration that needs to make lots of sweeping changes to the schema and all that, you can do it all right within a transaction and undo the whole thing at the end by just rolling the transaction back. And
so in your case, Brendan, you're actually developing custom plugins or modules for your CraftNet situation that are dependent on Postgres being used as the database. You couldn't reuse those somewhere else.
Well, the code is still going through all the same abstractions. So if we, for whatever reason, needed to make our own internal application be database agnostic, it wouldn't take much doing. It might already work. We just have no reason to test it.
Okay. I want to see Brad cry. Make him switch it over to MySQL.
come with a fun data migration at this point too.
Yeah.
Great.
So.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, that's that's the small taste of Postgres and what comes along with it. We really, it's been nice to see people using it from our perspective too, and we definitely haven't run into too many things like this, but just ironing out the edges, have run into a few, and happy to see people using it. So is there anything else we can do a whole different thing on Postgres probably and get into more specifics? Is there anything else we should mention just when you're upgrading?
I mean, the big elephant in the room. The big elephant in the room is that the next step would be that you start looking at the front end of your site and going through all your deprecation errors. But that's a whole different talk.
And what is, if somebody is upgrading, do they have the option to use Postgres?
No, there's no path from MySQL to Postgres. Okay. Potentially down the road, if a really good method for backing up your content in a
migrating
JSON type format or something like that came about, then that would be a way to get it from one to the other. But there's no, the database, the SQL itself is pretty much incompatible. So
you don't convert the database.
And just, there may be one out there that I haven't found, but I did do a decent amount of looking to try and find, a script or something that would just convert MySQL to Postgres.
Yeah.
And I couldn't find anything that reliably works. So you're right. I mean, outputting it to some kind of an interim format and then re-importing it might be the easiest way to go. And the only reason I'm mentioning that is just if someone gets it in their head, like, oh, I'll just, I'll port this MySQL database over to Postgres.
Yeah.
If you figure out a great way to do it, let me know, because I haven't found one.
Yeah, I think that for now, the best practical advice is that it's something you should consider for a new project, but don't, if you're already on MySQL, it's not like it's adding so much that it's worth the hassle in the first place.
Got it.
So just leave it be.
Great.
And just to kind of drive home how good the craft support is for Postgres. So there was an edge case problem that someone was having with with SEOmatic, the plugin for Craft 3. And it ended up being that, he was using Postgres and that he had created the fields with this architect plugin that, when we're trying to figure out if it was like some crazy edge case with Postgres or anything like that. And no, it was just me making a mistake in the plugin.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Any other topics we want to touch on before we wrap it up?
I think I'd rather touch on some lunch at this point.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Andrew, for coming out. We will be back when we have another topic to discuss. And everybody out there, thank you for joining. Have a great day.
Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Ben.